lot of the Gen AI technology is leaning into the recruiting process because we know how valuable and important it is to try and find really good talent and how burdensome and how many hours and how much work goes into that process. So you can start to tackle that. You can really start to change, how that process works and get, hopefully a great ROI on that process. But I also think Gen AI changes the type of talent that companies are looking for. I'm sure you've heard the saying, it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's someone using AI that's going to take your job.
Yeah.
And that very much, if your talent isn't getting comfortable using generative AI, finding ways to create their own productivity, then they're going to struggle.
Tony, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. I can see all your accolades behind you, but you've blurred them all out. So I don't,
it's a humble brag.
I don't know, but it's a humble brag, but then you blurred them. So it's like, well, now we don't know.
Yeah, they're there just in case you want to ask.
It's a cool conversation starter, I suppose. We'll get into that because that was something that was cool on our first time we ever met was your background and how that led you on a journey to where we are now, which I thought was really, really, really cool. So before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, my journey started with one of those accolades. In college, I studied industrial and labor relations, and I went into it not quite knowing what I was going to do, but of course, quickly it introduced me to human resources. And I did my first internship for IBM, and then another one and several more for Texas Instruments, and I fell in love with it. I felt like this is something I really get and I can do. And when I graduated, I went to work for GE in their HR leadership program, which is pretty storied. I had to move a few times and had a bunch of different experiences, but absolutely loved it. Stayed there with their lighting business. I did union relations roles, non-union HR manufacturing roles. I did, kind of headquarters roles for their sensing business for a little while, and supporting like their technology and engineering function. So a pretty wide variety of experiences. And then after a couple of years, I got recruited and went to the Stanley Works at the time. My first global HR manager role for a small part of the business is about $100 million. And we grew that business and that quickly expanded, the move included, focusing on Mac tools, which has a great Harvard Business Review case study about what a mess that was in before our leadership team was able to get in and drive some change. But my career continued to grow with Stanley all the way through leading HR for their global security business, about 10,000 people globally, about just under $2 billion. But I left to go be a CHRO at a public company for the CEO, who's someone I worked for and hired me in that first job at Stanley. We worked together most of my time there. And I was his CHRO for, just under 2 years and absolutely loved it. But it was in that role and the last role at Stanley in security where I discovered and worked with Upwork and really championed bringing Upwork into both organizations. So when I left that last HR role, I really, as much as I pursued other HR opportunities, I couldn't shake how much I really wanted to stay in this space of helping people think about their talent strategies and tapping into freelance talent the way I had. And so I reached out to Upwork and said, is there something I could do for you? And we came up with my current job, which is, we call it VP of HR Client Strategy, but it's really my job to try and attract and evangelize to HR clients how they can leverage this platform to shake things up and embrace all the changes that are happening in the marketplace.
Love that, man. By the way, what a way to start your career. IBM and GE. I mean, the reason I say that, not just because of the logos, but then we're very well renowned for their development programs, right? Everyone kind of knows that. So what an incredible opportunity coming in, right? To have that exposure.
Absolutely.
As well. Amazing. I think it'd be great to tell everyone a little bit more about Upwork. We talk about the gig economy a lot on the show. I use Upwork as a small business, but it's not just for small organizations. So that's also a misconception. I think that's out there. To talk a bit more about that, and also why in your previous job you decided to go the route of looking at an organization like Upwork?
Yeah, first of all, Upwork's the world's largest freelance marketplace. So we connect talent with people that need to get work done, both individuals like ourselves. I use it personally, and I've used it personally in the past, but also enterprises, and try to attract them to using this as an arm or a lever within their workforce ecosystem. Last year, talent on our platform made almost $4 billion. So a lot of money moves through this platform and enables this different way of working. And that's frankly part of what got me interested back when I was at Stanley. I needed a different solution for meeting my internal client needs to get talent in the door. And our traditional staffing process just took too long. And not just, for a kind of a quick turn. When we think of gig, you tend to think of short-term projects, something that someone can almost do overnight. But we needed high quality talent to get in the door working on projects so that we could meet our product development and delivery, launch, milestones. And we just struggled to tap into that, especially looking just around where we were located. So finally exploring what Upwork had to offer. At first, it seemed like something was just for like tech companies.
Yeah.
And that's why I felt like, well, we're this large manufacturing company. We've been around forever. This isn't for us. But the reality was, the deeper I dug, one, I knew that peers of mine, General Electric, Procter & Gamble, Samsung, were already clients. And I thought, well, if they're doing it, why aren't we doing this? What do I have to learn about this to figure out how to incorporate it into our strategy? And the more I learned, the more I recognized there's really high quality talent that once we integrated the system, we could bring on in days, not weeks and months. And my teams and our functions would benefit greatly, not to mention our own HR function, tapping into not just HR resources, but tech resources that would help us improve our own systems, our own capabilities, automate some things. That would give us such great benefit for our function, which we weren't doing. We weren't really getting down that digital transformation path. And once we started pulling on the string of, wow, what could we do with the freelancer? We found out there's a lot more that we could accomplish.
Yeah. It gives you that also, like you mentioned it earlier, though, but the speed, right? The ability to,
absolutely,
because, recruiting someone could take months. Oh, it does take months typically. Know, but especially in a small organization like ours, we need to make that change immediately. I mentioned to you during our discovery call, we had an issue with our website. Within hours, I had someone on Upwork fix it. I was like, wow, didn't we? That like kind of just one of those aha moments where I was like, whoa, that actually, I don't need a full-time IT director to be able to do that, right? And it kept the business moving, and we've kind of used Upwork multiple times. And this isn't, I'm not being paid, by the way, everyone, by Upwork. I just use the platform quite often as well. But in organizations, many people I speak to, they don't, that's not for us. But I think given what you've just shared, I think it's important for people to reconsider that, especially in times of disruption and change.
Absolutely.
Could you talk a bit more about that and why that's important?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. When I look at last year in particular, 2023, and still now in 2024, a lot of companies are really apprehensive about the economic markets. Mm-hmm. Last year they anticipated basically a freeze or decline in GDP. So therefore there'd be less spending. And of course, with interest rates going up, just expected that unemployment would jump and jobs would slow down. So in anticipating a slower economy, all in fairness due to the Fed increasing, the federal funds rate in the fastest pace ever. Of course, those are typical results that they'd expect to see. But in reality, this recession that everybody thought was going to come never materialized. And in fact, GDP grew, jobs were added above expectations just about every month, and the unemployment rate stuck around its 50-year low, roughly around 4% or lower, the entire year. And it's still, all those same things have continued to be true through 2024 for the most part. So that's a different economy than we can rely on analysts to predict and therefore batten down the hatches and just press pause and wait and see. companies need to be more agile, and they need to be able to flex to when things are materializing better than they expected. They need to be able to flex down when or if that that negative economy starts to show up, and they need to be able to do it very quickly. Not just because of the economy, but new technologies like we saw with the rapid adoption of Chat GPT. All of a sudden, everybody's like, "Here's this new technology. It promises productivity. Let's use it right away." But you don't know what you're looking for.
Well, like, we need a prompt engineer.
Fast.
Like, we need a prompt. All of a sudden, the most popular jobs out in the world was prompt engineer.
Absolutely.
Right. And no one had one.
But people don't even know what they want to write prompts for.
That's true.
Or how is that going to help you, find the productivity you need? So, to me, you don't want to go out. If I were still at Stanley or Fleer, I wouldn't want to go out and hire a full-time prompt engineer just because it's the new hot thing. But I've done that in the past around big data or I'm trying to think now I'm blanking on the technology that like weaves all the
just in overall digital transformation. Just in general, like the amount of hires companies were making left, right, and center, just on the full end-to-end spectrum of the digital.
Without a real understanding of how this is going to serve your strategy, just knowing, okay, this is important. We need this expertise now, and really, how great is that expertise? When things are that new, that's constantly learning as well. So to me, when things are uncertain, being able to tap into talent, just like using your example, like within hours, and have them working on something with their expertise within hours and get you leveraging that for your business, learning from that, and then adapting. Maybe you learn that instead of a prompt engineer, what you really need is resources to train your large language model for a custom GPT. Those are things that you start to discover with experience, not with just putting all your resources in one basket out of the gate. And that's what freelancers give you, is that adaptability, the ability to flex up and down and respond to whether it's economic markets or changing, talent market conditions. It allows companies to be a lot more agile.
Yeah. You've already spoken a little bit, but you mentioned in our last conversation, talent access versus talent acquisition. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think talent acquisition, just like when mergers and acquisitions, the idea that you're buying this resource and you own it and everything that they develop, design, and dream, like that to me is a bygone mentality. Because even if you hire folks full time, their average tenure is floating at or below 4 years. So they're not spending 40 years in a company like my dad did when he worked for Xerox for forever. Yeah. Instead, they're moving around, and it's becoming much more accepted to move around and change the company you work for and change jobs in less than 2 years. So as that's becoming more the norm, acquisition is already kind of a myth. But aside from that, access is more this idea that you're tapping in, you're borrowing these resources. And the story that I feel like really defines this difference in thinking is once I was having this roundtable with a bunch of CHROs, and I'm talking about Upwork and the way I've used it in the past, and of course, making recommendations about it. And one of the CHROs said, "Listen, Tony, this platform sounds super interesting, but I'm more worried about my full-time talent that's already on your platform as well."
Yeah, that's true. They already got side hustles already. Like, they're already using it.
Yeah, they very well could. But I think breaking down that comment is what defines that difference. So first, my kind of flippant reaction was, well, that sounds like a you problem. Because really, let's think about why they would be on our platform at the same time they're working for you. They want to make more money. Yep. They don't feel like they get paid enough in their job, so they need to extend themselves somewhere else. They want to do something, they want to give themselves a security net, a safety net, in case they don't have much job security. They're worried about the next layoff that's going to come in a quarter. Or maybe they're just doing something that's a passion that they don't get to, leverage or utilize in their day-to-day job with you. Either way, one, as long as they're hitting all their performance goals, delivering the outcomes, and they're successful with what you want, what right do you have over their whatever time they have? And that's the real point. It's Well, the thinking that I think is behind that, the motivation behind that comment is, if these employees have any extra time,
It should be.
why am I not getting it?
Yeah.
I've acquired them. I'm entitled to first right of refusal on any bonus or free time that they have to advance what we're doing. But talent doesn't think that way anymore. And I know you know this. Talent doesn't think so much part-time, full-time. They think my time. And how do they want to monetize their time or not? But it belongs to them. So if they have free time, it's up to them if they're going to give it back to their company and try to leverage that to maybe move up or just help out, or if they're going to go on a platform and make some extra money on the side. I think that's more the mentality of talent these days.
Do you think that hybrid work and remote work has accelerated that?
Absolutely. Because it's one of the myths I think around freelancers is that if they're remote, you can't really trust what they're doing. You don't know if they're working as hard as you think they should be on your work. And that really got accelerated with the pandemic when everybody's forced in that situation and we see employers pulling employees back. A lot of that is this challenge with trust. If we can't see them, how do we know that they're doing what they should be doing? They're off doing laundry or picking up their kids, and instead of thinking, hey, that's great, like if they're doing all that. Anyway, but to your question, the forcing everybody into remote work, I think forced more hiring managers and leaders to recognize it's not all bad.
Yeah.
There's lots of people who can work very productively and very efficiently when they're working remotely. And this is talent that you can trust. And it gave them a lot more comfortability with collaboration tools. We saw investment in collaboration tech, of course, skyrocket. So there's became a lot more comfort in, instead of just having conference calls where the people that aren't in the room don't really get a chance to speak. Now everybody's always on Zoom calls. And as annoying as it sometimes can be when you really don't want to be on a camera, I think that everybody's gotten a lot more comfortable with it, which means they've also gotten more comfortable with working with people in different time zones, in different cities. As long as they're behind a camera and behind a computer, it feels a lot more natural than it did 5 years ago.
What do you say to people? Because I'm just going to talk about one of my concerns, honestly, when I went down this rabbit hole of how do I find the right person? How do I know they're good? Because you spend time going through Upwork, and this is my experience. I'm looking at different, obviously you do your search, what you're looking for, you get a list of people, you can view their profiles, you can browse through some of it. That was for me probably the biggest barrier. Like, how do I choose the right person? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure that's a big.
Well, there's a lot of ways how. Well, of course, the effort you put into building your post and defining what you're looking for, really defining success and what skills are going to be required to deliver that success so that anybody looking for your job can do their best job to try to match what you're looking for. That's one way to start. And of course, now Upwork has Gen AI tools that help you do that, help you translate this into what's going to be most effective to accomplish what you're trying to find. Our Gen AI also helps you filter and match the talent. But I'd say even beyond that, marketplaces, and there's hundreds now, part of what makes them successful is how transparent they are. There's such transparency, and tech in general has brought so much transparency to the way we try and resource for talent. Think of how much more transparent the labor market is when we've got LinkedIn and everybody's got their resume posted online 24/7. That didn't really exist before. So now recruiters can go out and they can find people, search for people proactively that are likely not even looking for work, and find talent that they want, rather than you go before that. And the only way you're finding talent that's not looking for work is usually through an executive recruiting or an agency that's calling people and that they maybe is somehow in their Rolodex. You couldn't just fish and find people that might fit your profile that didn't already apply.
Yeah.
So think of that transparency to the traditional staffing process. It's on steroids when you get to freelance marketplaces, because you see how much work someone's done. You see their 5-star rating on their project and all the elements of their project, which you have to do to complete the project as a hiring manager.
You'll never get that on a CV, right? Like your traditional recruiting, you never get to see, oh, these are like the last 10 projects they've done. You can view them. You can see the comments from the company they work with. Like that is just such a game changer.
And you can see how many jobs they've done, how much money they've made, all of that. What I like to say, this is a reputation-based economy. So if you build a good reputation, you're going to earn more work. Admittedly, that can be the hard part, is just getting started, building a reputation if you're new. But once that snowball starts rolling, it expands, and there's plenty of folks on the platform that make millions of dollars. So, but part of that, and part of the speed that we talked about before, is because it's so transparent. When someone bids on your job, you see all that information. You feel a lot more confident that if they've had all this success, they're going to have success with you as well.
Yeah. You mentioned AI. Obviously, everyone's integrating that. How was the rise of AI, of Gen AI, impacting the way leaders think about hiring now?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a lot of ways. One, they're thinking about the technology they use to find talent, and whether it's the AI, resources on our platform, or whether it's off the shelf AI, recruiting tools and assessment tools. I mean, I go to all the HR technology conferences, including HR Tech coming up in just a couple of weeks, and they always have great, interesting new technology. And a lot of the Gen AI technology is leaning into the recruiting process, because we know how valuable and important it is to try and find really good talent, and how burdensome and how many hours and how much work goes into that process. So you can start to tackle that. You can really start to change, how that process works, and get, hopefully a great ROI on that process. But I also think Gen AI changes the type of talent that companies are looking for. I'm sure you've heard the saying, it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's someone using AI that's going to take your job.
Yeah.
And that very much, if your talent isn't getting comfortable using generative AI, finding ways to create their own productivity, then they're going to struggle. And it's a tough reality right now, this gap within the productivity promise. Upwork did this really interesting research that shows that about 91% of leaders expect to get productivity and enhancements out of AI, while 77% of employees think it's added more work to their jobs. So there's this massive disconnect where what they're looking for is people that are using AI, making themselves more efficient. But what they're finding is employees going, I can't figure this out. I don't know how I'm supposed to use it. I'm struggling with getting this training, and I got a job to do. And the fact of the matter is, freelancers, because again, it's this reputation-based economy that in success with other clients delivering what they're looking for that allows you to be successful, they use and learn Gen AI tools at a much higher clip. It's almost 2-to-1 compared to employees. And especially Gen Z does the same thing. Gen Z talent uses AI a lot more than their full-time other generational counterparts. So employers are looking for talent that they know is going to bring this to the table. Yeah. Because like we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, they don't necessarily know how they want to use it, but they know they want to be getting the productivity promise of it.
Yeah. It's something I talk about with my team all the time. I'm using generative AI all day, every day. And even before our show, I use AI to look at the notes that your team sent over. And I asked it to organize it in a specific way that I've written a prompt that whenever someone sends me the show notes or the questions for our show, I've already have this pre-existing prompt that changes the format to exactly how I like to have it. I just throw it in there. It does its thing. It comes out with my bullet points and my questions. It also recommends actually a title for the show. It recommends potential clips from different questions I'm about to ask you right now. And because I wrote that prompt, right? And it's just like every day, like that's hours of work that I would spend manually doing some of those tasks, if that makes sense.
I think people love to hear that kind of story too. They just don't know how to get from I don't use it to now I can have a custom GPT.
Yes.
It's built just for me. That does what a task that I do every day that takes 50, 70% of that task and allows me to focus on the real value, not the consumption part, which is the most work. Mm-hmm. But that's the promise. And that's, even if you don't know how to build it into staffing system at your enterprise, or use it to create a internal facing chatbot. You could use it just for this and get great productivity, but it's closing the gap, and it's closing the gap with, ideally, that's why we exist, I think, is to provide experts that can dip in, do this for you, and dip back out until you need them again, rather than feeling like the only way to have this is if you hire someone full time.
Yeah. For me, I just kind of use it in a way I look at it is anything that doesn't require my experience or expertise, I replace. So like to free me up to have more valuable conversations, spend more time with my team. So just removing, like I just sat down and wrote down like this, what all of the things I'm spending my time on, and what are the areas that are actually adding the most value, and everything else I can just replace that with processes, and most of them are powered by generative AI. To be able to do that. So it's almost, me and Shane looked at it the other day, my co-founder, it's almost like having 3 extra employees. We looked at it, that typically companies would hire. So for example, a copywriter, we don't need that, right? So, social media marketing, it kind of helps the team, the two members of the team we have now, they would typically have to have 2 dedicated people for some of the work that it does around our social media and marketing activities. Sales, in terms of outreach to different clients. Yeah. Like it just it's a whole team that I've got basically, but it does take time to set up, and it's not, I'm a tech savvy person, but not everyone's like that. I get it as well. So there is the education piece, but again, that's where something like Upwork, where you could reach out to someone to help you do that rather than hiring someone, a prompt engineer. You can experiment with that and figure out, actually, what do I actually need? Oh, I don't really need a full-time prompt engineer to help me set all of this up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or I'm not quite sure what a prompt engineer does, but I've heard I need it. I can hire someone for a day to train me and my team, show us what some prompts are, work with us, and that's just a day. That's not a huge investment. You're not hiring a consulting company. So even if it's just for education, I've had people stop at our booth at expo shows and say, I use Upwork personally just to train myself on new technologies, because I can essentially rent an expert.
Yeah, I never thought.
And I think that's brilliant. It's not just to deliver outcomes. It could be to deliver training, but there's also off-the-shelf solutions. Like I advise a couple companies. One company I advise, it's called Culture OS, and they make a generative AI software that will automate the entire survey process that you do for your team internally. And that includes, sending out the survey, doing all the analytics, benchmarking, and making recommendations. Any HR person that's done this whole annual or monthly or whatever rhythm that you have knows that it's a lot of work. And what you really just want are the outputs about how employees feel. Mm-hmm. But they take it a step further, and they have a voice-activated chat bot that can schedule and call your employees to follow up and have a dialogue about the survey responses to get their deeper sentiments and give you better data. And it's anonymous. They're not talking to an individual. They're talking to a bot. It's actually a very comfortable conversation, which is one of the amazing things about the newest versions of these technologies. Mm-hmm. But further, it can have other conversations. Like you could schedule this bot to have a conversation with you that's like more like a one-on-one, or to ask questions about your company's benefits or policies or whatever you might need, even compensation conversations. So that blows my mind. It's still very early days. They're always looking for companies to beta test with. But what I think is really interesting is you don't have to know how you want to use it to be able to experiment with a totally off-the-shelf solution. Say that 3 times fast. and get great productivity and learn a lot and have great data and analytics and benchmarking, and just experiment with things like that. In addition to experimenting on your own, frankly, I think companies need to be doing both.
Yeah. What we didn't cover this, so I want to make sure. What are the main objections that typically companies you get that they maybe perceive as barriers to using a service like Upwork, but is maybe? And
the first is just we just don't do it that way. Like I can't believe how much I hear we're just a really traditional company, which I feel like is a euphemism for saying we're old school and we don't like to change. And I always cringe when people say it, like, why are you admitting that? Like, this is your opportunity to champion the change that your organization needs, not go, you know what? I think we're better off just doing things the way we've always done them.
People like
but
comfort.
That's the number one.
Yeah.
What's that?
They're comfortable with what they know, right?
They are. So, a former colleague of mine used to always say, our biggest competition isn't the other marketplaces, it's the status quo. Just getting organizations to embrace doing something a bit differently that's going to open up tremendous ROI and great value like speed to talent. But beyond that, I think there's a lot of just myths about freelancers. A lot of people still think when they think of freelance, they think, oh, this is someone that just can't find a real job. So this is their gig work until they get, full-time offer. Or they think it's low quality, low skill. Or they feel like they can't trust, freelance talent the way they can trust their full-time employees.
Yeah.
All of which are just myths. It's the challenge of thinking outside the box related to full-time employees and traditional employees that people think, well, these other options must be worse because we don't do it.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's how I thought before I started engaging. Yeah. So I'm the same way, but that's also how I know those are myths and you can overcome them by just having positive experiences and thinking through this, not just as a Band-Aid, but as a part of your workforce planning strategy. This opens up so many doors. And when that light bulb went off for me, I got so excited about being the one to champion this change in my company. And that passion continued because I really saw this as a true opportunity to bring value to the company in a lot of different ways, because there's cost savings involved. There's, the ability to stretch and experiment with new products and access talent in totally different ways and just work a lot faster and get so much more done with less, frankly. I just, I was passionate about that. And I think when that clicks for clients, they start to get it. But then the next big real dilemma is the change management piece. Even if you get it, how am I can convince all these other leaders who I know don't get it, and they're gonna have the same reaction I did. Yeah. So that's where I think there's a lot of challenge in trying to find how to drive that process the right way so you can be successful, show the ROI, and expand into other teams or functions after you've kind of kicked this off and piloted internally.
Yeah. So this is like any kind of transformation program, or like it's like the culture. It's a culture change.
It is.
It's getting people uncomfortable and moving away from what they've known for their whole entire careers, right? As well. One of the things that I found, which to your point there was really interesting, is some of the most talented people I know are the ones that are going freelance because they know their value and they recognize their value now in the marketplace. And they said, actually, I want the freedom to be able to work when I want, how I want, and with whom I want as well. And I'm coming across absolutely exceptional talent. And I was speaking to my friend recently, and I told him how much we were paying for one of the freelancers, and he was like, "That's pretty expensive." I was like, "This is how expensive it is to have them as a full-time employee." And he was like, "Oh," and I was like, I actually couldn't even afford to have this individual as a full-time employee, but I could afford to hire them for a week. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And the value I extracted from that conversation and that work in a week, I could never have afforded as a small business to hire that person. And my friend was like, like an aha moment. And that's what I was trying to explain to Shane and the team. I was like, we're getting access to some of the best talent in the world that we actually can't afford if we were paying a traditional salary, if that makes sense, and trying to compete with some of the bigger companies out there. And then I was like, it was like a light bulb moment that I was like, wow, I can access some incredible people here and work with them for a couple of days, but really maximize those few days and extract as much value as possible to help us shortcut our path to success as well. So I'm seeing the opposite now. I'm seeing some of my friends, family members, some of those successful people I've worked with are going freelance because they want that flexibility and they want to be able to choose their time, hours, and who they want to work with.
We talked a bit about AI earlier in the fact that generationally, Gen Z uses it a lot more than the other generations. We know organizations want to tap into that talent. They want that AI comfortable, talent to bring into the organizations and help them achieve this productivity promise. But our research through the Upwork Research Institute shows that 53% of Gen Z is already freelancing at least 40 hours a week,
Really?
Instead of a traditional job.
Wow.
So if you want to tap into that talent, to your point, if you want to tap into that talent and you're only looking for them with full-time roles, you're missing out on half the population, because I think especially the really high quality, really in-demand talent, they're choosing, just like you said, to do this already. And that data supports it. So organizations that are limiting themselves will continue to see, for not just that reason, also workforce participation continues to decline. It has been for 30 years, but they see the pool of talent that they're fishing in, the pond of talent, it's shrinking every year. It's getting harder and harder. And if that's all you're fishing in, you're in danger of starving at some point. But there's another pond that's increasing. We see freelancers growing to be 50% of the US economy by 2027, 2028. So that's just around the corner. If they're not fishing in this expanding pond, not only are they missing out on in-demand, even niche talent, but they're missing out on where the talent is going. And it's kind of like the Wayne Gretzky, quote, skate to where the puck is going. And organizations aren't. They're skating to where it used to be. So this is their opportunity. I think the other thing that's salient in what you said is when people freelance, they can really build their expertise in a specific area, because they'll do this for multiple different companies. So while they do that fractionally for you, they're doing it fractionally for others. They're able to do it so much more optimized and efficiently on that fractional basis than they would as a full-time employee that has a lot of other neighbor responsibilities and a lot of other politics and things that they have to learn and deal with. Instead, they can get really, really sharp in just a few areas, and then they can be an expert. And even though they're charging you more, what you're getting out of it has a much bigger value, because they can get it done so much better, faster, and smarter.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed as well, they also bring different insights and perspectives from those organizations and lived experiences that they wouldn't get, whether it's in industry experience from different industries that they're bringing in as new perspectives, or cultural experiences working with people across different cultures and geographies as well. So you're also benefiting from that. As well. The amount of times I've had people I'm working with say, actually, I did this for a client. Maybe you should think about how they've done X. And I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, okay. Interesting. You wouldn't really typically get that. I was like, okay, yeah, we should experiment with that. They're seeing success. So I'm kind of indirectly benefiting, if that makes sense.
You get diversity in kind of that traditional sense that we think about it, at least in the US, of you can work with people from all different backgrounds and different countries, et cetera. But you get the diversity of thought with people working in different industries. But that does tap into a fear that I get asked this question all the time. Well, like, how do we make sure they don't ever work for a competitor? Well, because if I expose them to my IP or the way my business operates, are they just going to go work for a competitor and tell them all my secrets? Freelancers don't want to do that. I feel like, this idea that they just want to take your secrets and sell them on the market. One, that's not great for their reputation, and this is a reputation-based marketplace. If that ever got back, it'd be a huge hindrance to their freelance careers. But they do want to share best practices, and they usually sign NDAs when they're working for large enterprises, so they can say, hey, I've worked for a client, and here's some experience that we've had, and this worked well, and this was a challenge. You get the benefit of that, but it doesn't mean that they're turning around and showing you what this other company does and how and why. Yeah. So I think that's another myth that companies need to overcome. And I think it's also a myth that they feel like their full-time employees couldn't do a lot of the same things that they're afraid of freelance talent doing. But it's a hurdle that they have to get over.
But remember, again, that was one of the misconceptions about remote work before the pandemic, right?
Absolutely.
I'll give you an example. My wife worked for a finance company for 10 years. And it had this really old, outdated system where if she did actually have to work from home one day, she had to log in through this really complicated service and log in, and it had like a timer to make sure you're working. Otherwise, it timed out, and they were like, "Oh, we can't do this because we're finance, and you can't externally access all of these things, etc." Within a month of everyone going, of lockdown, they had built a brand new system, rolled it out to 20,000 people. So it wasn't that you couldn't do it. It was just because you didn't want to, because it was change, and it was uncomfortable as well. I had another company who just before lockdown, I was talking to the CTO, and we were like, "Hey, we've got this 5-year project we're working on to move our customer service call centers remotely, and we're going to do it over 5 years." Pandemic hits, they did it in a week. They had and we were both laughing on the call about it like a week later. I was like, "You had a 5-year plan that you ran with her." And she was like, "Chris, I know, because all of a sudden that red tape disappeared." Right.
Yeah.
Or and it wasn't even real red tape. Like it wasn't even real. Right. It was just people's the uncertainty and discomfort that people had to overcome, and you had this 5-year plan to do it, and did it in a week. So that stuff amazes me.
Well, that's another thing we run into all the time is, again, we've always done it this way. So even as companies are exploring using freelancers, say, all right, we have to background check every single freelancer because we background check all of our employees, or every employee in our company uses our company hardware. We can't do a virtual device, or we can't do a firewall, because this is what we do for everybody else. And I think, to your point, companies that when they get far enough into the process, their leadership's bought in, they go, "We don't need to do that. Maybe we need to do that for some freelancers, but we don't need to do that for someone building a PowerPoint, or we don't need to do that for these type of projects, or if they have this type of they don't have access to our employer customer information." There's ways to solve for that, but when I'm talking to prospects, they're thinking, how do I apply all of these other traditional ways of working to now this new group? And what I always want to tell them is, you don't. You build new rules. And that's part of the change management process. And all of a sudden it starts to feel like work. And they're like, I don't know if I don't want to commit to all of this. And to me, it's their loss.
Yeah. Well, they're going to keep fishing in the pond, and we're all going to keep fishing in the ocean. So,
that's right. I love that.
So let them do that. It's more talent for us.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there anything that we have missed, Tony, that we haven't covered? Do you think it's important?
Oh man, we covered a lot.
Yeah.
Listen, I couldn't be more passionate about this space, which is growing rapidly. When I first started looking at Upwork and we did an RFP, I think there might be 40 or 50 marketplaces that were doing something similar. And by the estimates that I've seen, it's closer to 800 plus now, with just 100 marketplaces coming on board now, or this year. So I think the proof is in the pudding. Like, there's a reason there's this rapid growth. There's a reason more people are choosing it as a career, and why young talent is choosing this at a majority now, because that's where the market is moving. That's the new revolution within the talent marketplace. And I really want HR leaders to see that, to champion it, like we talked about in the discovery call. Because if they're not, they'll be replaced by their marketing and technology counterparts that do. And we see more and more CPOs being folks that come from other functions, where they've embraced technology, they've embraced new ways of working, and they've leveraged their influence and their internal political capital to drive the change. And they've been recognized for understanding the need for these new people solutions. And the organization doesn't reach deeper into the people pool, people management and function for their next leaders. They reach across the functions to find those that do. That's why I want to bring this to HR, because I want them to be the champions of the entire holistic people strategy, and make sure that includes all types of talent that can come to work for their organization.
Dude, I feel like we need to do a whole podcast series on this area. But I love what you're doing. As I said, when your team reached out, I was like, I am a customer. So, and it's helped grow our more business, and it's something when I speak to CHROs on a day-to-day basis, I realize that many of them really are not utilizing this as well. So hopefully this helped everyone listening One question really random just popped into my head. Do you integrate with companies' current internal talent marketplaces? Is that
That's a good question. Not really, not with their internal, because typically they're building their internal talent place using another off-the-shelf software.
Yeah, but I'm like, do you connect with any of those? So that would be incredible if you could have like the power of your own their talent. You know, every company I'm speaking to now, they're building an internal talent marketplace and then adding on what you offer. That would be.
We've just started integrating with VMSs. So we integrate with several VNly, FlexTrack. I'm gonna miss some, so I'll probably get in trouble. But there's several that Beeline is another one that we're integrating with now, and we're doing our first pilots with. That's something we haven't done in forever. So at least the systems where internal folks go to find talent, we do integrate with. And I think to your point, when companies build their internal marketplaces, the hardest thing is to do that skills mapping and maintain that inventory. And we've tried to work within skills-based design for decades. Myself in HR, the different companies I've worked on a few different skills mapping programs, and those always, by the time they're done, they're no longer relevant. Everybody's lost interest and fall apart.
Yeah.
But I really believe technology is going to get us a quantum leap forward in skills-based org design, because Gen AI is going to be able to do the mapping for us, identify, and that's going to help internal marketplaces. It's going to help hiring managers when they're trying to find talent, just to get something done. When they let go of jobs and they embrace skills for how they source getting work done, and the technology directs them straight to that talent, and it's current and it's up to date, that's going to be a big gap that's bridged. That's going to help organizations embrace this. And skills-based is getting a lot of momentum. And I think things like micro credentials, universal credentials, certifications are going to continue to grow rapidly, because technology is going to enable that to be a lot easier than it's ever been before.
Yeah, you're right. Like in the past, it was such a heavy lift, to your point. By the time you've done it, you're already out of date and behind. But the ability for AI to do skills inference and skills mapping and at scale globally, because if you ask different departments, they'll have different definitions, right? So it just becomes super complicated to be able to do that. And all of a sudden now you've got like 400 skills you don't
have a system to kind of bring it together. And people, I love that companies have internal marketplaces, because it shows that they're embracing this idea that the talent that you need isn't necessarily just on your team. Yeah. To me, that's a first step. Like if you can embrace that internally, go the next step and embrace it externally, and use that same talent, that fractionality mentality, and get even more done and map even more skills. So I hope organizations keep moving that direction. I believe they will.
Yeah. Dude, we could talk forever. I've got to let you at some point.
This is great.
Yeah. Before I let you go, where can people connect with you personally if they want to reach out and say hi and learn more? And then where can they learn more about Upwork?
Yeah, I'd love it if they reached out to me on LinkedIn. I think it's a great way to connect. I try to share some additional thought leadership and things like where I'm going. I go to a lot of conferences and events so you can meet up, learn more, and I always love to share more about what we're doing. But they can also, of course, to learn more about Upwork, go to Upwork's website, just upwork.com. They can learn more about the marketplace itself, and they can also learn about the enterprise solution, what's different about that and what that can bring to their company. And they can also go to Upwork's Research Institute, which will share a lot more of the data, the surveys, analysis and information, some of which I've shared today. And they can stay on top of the kind of things that we're publishing.
Amazing. So I will definitely link some of the research you referenced in the chat for everyone. So it'll make it easier for everyone. But apart from that, it is a pleasure chatting, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Absolutely. Chris, it was great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.